This is the second episode of Catlin's Hangouts, and today I'm with the alt hypothesis to. Oh shit. Okay, that's a great start. But this is the second episode of Catlin's Hangout, and I'm with the alternative hypothesis to talk about Kraut's recent videos about the alt-right. So, yeah, do you want to kind of introduce yourself, alt hypothesis?
Yeah, I'll introduce myself to mostly my viewers here. Yes, I'm the Alternative Hypothesis. Have a YouTube channel. Made some video responses to Kraut recently in response to the Kraut train wreck. Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to talk about the eternal Kraut and the other things that we were going to talk about on here as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we got quite a bit to talk about. So, yeah, let's start with how this all started. Basically, what is the deal with Kraut, and how has he kind of gotten this personal with the alt-right?
Oh, well, okay, yeah, I noticed you, Halo. What I think happened, okay, I think it actually, like, there was the Rage After Storm thing. I think that's where it sort of started.
Yeah.
Because he did the doxing, tried to get her fired or something. Got a big backlash for that. And the problem with that is that he couldn't really fight back against the backlash. So he tried to make a video defending what he did. You can't really defend that. There's no defending that. So he couldn't really hit back. And so basically he was kind of, beat up by quote unquote the alt-right, sort of indirectly. And so what I think happened is he couldn't really fight back. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what he tried to do with the race realism thing, his attack on race realism, which of course he's saying the alt-right, he's calling it the alt-right. What I think he's trying to do is he's trying to hit back in a way that's like allowed, like, because arguing against somebody, debunking them, that's an allowed thing to do, whereas doxing stuff, that's not allowed. That's like against the rules, the social rules or whatever. So I think that's where this comes from. So I think that's sort of the motive, and I think that's why you're seeing that's why it's so crazy. As we were talking about before the chat, like it would be, the crowd would have been so much better off if you just went to Rational Wiki, like the Rational Wiki page on racialism, and just repeated like all the classics. Like if you just went, it's something the alt-right has never considered, more variation within than between. Okay, like these kinds of basic arguments. On his channel, like just talking, forget from an intellectual standpoint, just from like a propaganda standpoint. If he did that, his videos would be like, instead of 50-50 likes, dislikes, it would be like maybe 5,000 likes to 1,000 dislikes. Like he'd still get a lot of people giving him shit, but it wouldn't be like this disaster. But instead, he's going off and doing, he's arguing in a way that's like really weird.
He's taking it really personal.
Yeah, like it's something that you would sort of see if you had like a rando on Facebook who you asked him to make arguments against something. Like if you just went up to a rando on Facebook and told them about RK, and this person happened to be a liberal, he would say something like, "The alt-right thinks that black people lay eggs." That kind of ridiculous straw man. That's something that you would sort of see from just a random person on the internet who you just talk to it in like 2 seconds. But I think even if you took a random person on the internet and gave them a 100,000 subscriber channel, they would do quite a bit more research before saying anything, because what they're saying is going to be seen by lots and lots of people. And so so what Kraut's sort of doing is he's making like the arguments that a rando on Facebook would make, except with like a giant YouTube channel, and that's why it's such a spectacular fail. And yeah, it's just really something that really surprised me. Like I was, when I saw him make these videos, I was like, oh boy, you know, it's the race debate again. You know, it's finally a chance to redo the 2011 race thing.
Yeah, with
But
Evogen.
oh yeah,
yeah.
oh, the classics. Yeah, but the thing is, like, back then, like, their arguments, I mean, it was two things. Back then, their arguments were better, like they were doing the classics. And I was a lot dumber. Like I knew a lot less back then. If I could redo those things, it would be a lot different. But this time, it's way different, because first off, the scale of operate is like way bigger. You know, like the size of Kraut's video and the YouTube channels and the traffic my videos are getting. Like, it's a totally different scale of things. But at the same time, it's way dumber. Like, way stupider. The opposition is way stupider than it was back then. Even though and so it's funny. Like I did all this. It's sort of like I did all this training. Now, not really. Like I researched this stuff because I'm actually like really interested in it. But it's sort of like I did all this training, and then I get into the ring, and it's like a special needs kid or something. It's really
I was actually generally really interested in Kraut's arguments, and I actually went into a lot of research myself to kind of make at least a debunk video on Kraut's claims. But then I saw his videos, and it just didn't really have any arguments, so I didn't really knew how to tackle that issue, how to really refute something that doesn't really have any arguments in the first place.
Yeah, it's sort of like how do I put it? There was an episode in The Simpsons where you had this guy who was like a radical Luddite. He was like revolting against technology, and part of his revolt, like, he tried to escape going to prison, and he tried to escape on like an old-timey Wright Brothers style aircraft, and then there were fighter jets that came in to intercept and said, this plane is too slow to intercept. So it's sort of like Kraut's video. It's like, this is too slow to intercept. Not quite. I mean, you can respond to it, but like for example, and what's also, and I kept saying this throughout the video, and a lot of people wouldn't think this. I'm also sort of glad that he made a video response to me, because that makes it much more plausible, much more believable when I tell people that Kraut and I were in a conversation about this stuff, and I told him, look, Kraut, I'll go through like everything with you. I'll keystroke this for you, because he's a big YouTube channel. You know, if I could convince him, he could. You know, that would be a great gain for the cause of racism. Okay, so. So I gave him all this. I offered him like everything on a platter, okay. And of course, if you were to come in and like try to debunk, I mean, that would be fantastic, because not only would you get all the arguments presented to you, but you would also have more knowledge than is in the article, because he could talk to me and sort of bounce off. If he said this, how would I respond to this? If he said this, how would I respond to this? Because when you talk to somebody for a long time, you can sort of drill down into where the actual weaknesses are and where they're really going to have a hard time responding. And everything has that. Even every seemingly invincible argument has a few things that are maybe a bit of a speculative thing. Okay, so and he could have had that, right? But he didn't. He said, no, I would rather talk to real academics. It's like, well, he's been talking to real academics, and they're leading him down a smoking hole. So.
Those academics could have at least told Kraut that a donkey is not a subspecies of a horse.
That is it. Yeah. Well, I didn't even consider that when I made the video, but yeah, these academics, I wonder to what extent is he even in contact with them?
Yeah, I think the whole 2 months of research is kind of overblown, or else he just really sucks at research.
Yeah, I wonder if he had like a 1 hour conversation with these people or something. And also it appears to me that they're not reviewing his videos or or they're they're really stupid. Now I don't like I'm not an academic, but I know personally like and talk regularly to people with PhDs, and they'll tell you that there are people who will get their PhD. They'll go through and do the PhD process because that's sort of the easiest thing for them. And but frankly, like in terms of knowing like what a the definition of a species, for example, what they'll do is back in sophomore biology or freshman biology, they'll write out that, oh no, species is actually a more complicated thing. There's the phylogenetic species, there's the different types of species, whatever, or definitions of species. And they'll learn that, and then they advance through their credentialization, and then they're like 45, and they don't really deal with that anymore, and they just sort of forget that and just say sort of the more basic thing that species is the species is defined by being able to breed with other members of the species, and being able to breed with, that's the demarcation line between species, which is sort of like a really basic heuristic that's given to people like I think in high school. I forget when that's even taught, but it's like a false thing that is a useful heuristic that you teach little kids, right? It's not, because the truth is a lot more complicated. But when you're just teaching little kids biology, you just say that's what species means. And so I think what may happen with academics is that they, you have to remember, it's like, wow, they're really smart. They got that PhD. They had to learn a lot of stuff to do that. Okay, but that may have been 20 years ago. You forget a lot in 20 years, and they can make very basic errors, even though they're really brilliant, because they're constantly working, for example, in neuroscience, and they're talking about how the brain reacts to risk or reward situation, or what sort of what parts of the brain light up, in response to different stimuli or whatever. They may know a whole lot of stuff about that, but if they're not constantly reviewing, constantly revising, stuff they learned in sophomore biology, why would you expect them to know stuff from sophomore biology?
Yeah. And the thing with PhDs is that a lot of people treat PhDs as like if you have a PhD, then you know immediately everything about science, apparently, because there's this one girl called Coherent State, and she constantly tries to kind of get at me on the whole race argument, and she would constantly mention that she's going for a PhD in physics. And it's like, okay, that's great that you got a PhD in physics. If I want to know about quantum mechanics, then I'll go to you. But that doesn't mean that you are knowledgeable in biology or neurology at all. And about the whole, and even if they got a PhD in biology, then that doesn't necessarily mean that they are knowledgeable in this field, because a YouTuber called King Crocoduck did a good video on this, on how a lot of creationists used kind of their PhDs as kind of an argument of authority to kind of say, yeah, they're basically saying, because I got a PhD, therefore my views on evolution and creationism are valid and correct. And it's like, yeah, it's very dishonest tactic, and that's why I don't really crowd shouldn't keep constantly saying like, oh yeah, I got real academics to support me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are knowledgeable in the issues of race and human biodiversity.
Yeah. One thing you say dishonest, I don't know. They might not be dishonest. They might think that, oh, I'm got a PhD. I did all of like the basic, science stuff. They may not be dishonest. They may think they really are, king shit a diaper hell.
You mean the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Oh yeah, sure. I don't like the thing is, Jesus Christ, people like say that. That's like fucking every freshman psychology. That's just their fancy way of saying you're stupid.
Yeah, basically, it's like it's like an ad hominem, but made in a more scientific term.
It's like, oh, I see someone has just finished freshman psychology basic intro class or whatever. That's neat. And so they're using so like every time every like college kid who's like turns 20, as you know, they say the Dunning-Kruger effect, like you know how old they are. It's kind of funny. So
It's like they discovered this amazing thing.
yeah. So okay. So that's that's the thing. Forgot what I was gonna say something else about that I thought was sort of interesting about PhDs, but then we talked about something else and I forgot what I was gonna say. So I forgot what I was gonna say. I don't have anything to say.
But should we go finally over the videos that Crowd has made so far?
I guess I made video responses. I don't know what exactly I could really say here. Like
yeah, but maybe not everyone has seen your videos.
Okay.
So basically, just kind of go over the arguments that you've made in your videos.
Oh well. Okay. Well, his first video was attacking RK selection, like RK selection theory in humans. Like, okay, an RK selection theory in humans, it's basically just sort of reproductive strategies is the idea. And sort of in animals, you know, you could have a large number of offspring, but very few of them survived. You put very little or no effort into rearing them. Maybe you defend the sort of clutch of eggs for a little while until they hatch, and then you're off. So that's sort of the R spectrum of it, and the K spectrum of it is you have a very small number of offspring. You know, like maybe 5 or 6, like a litter, or even fewer, like whales and elephants and humans. You have like literally 1. So that's like extreme K selection, and that's just sort of that in animals. And what some racist researchers pointed out or argued is that there seems to be that seems to exist slightly within humans, within Homo sapiens, that some populations of Homo sapiens have slightly more offspring on average than others. For example, some races have higher twinning rates than others. Now, Russian went a bit further and talked about, like, looked at things. I think he looked at things like parental investment. I may be wrong. There's a danger of speaking off the cuff here. Also, like rates of development. Like, you know, one thing about that's sort of a characteristic of a K-selected organism is that they developed slowly. And he'll find, and one thing Rushton pointed out is that they're basically, you know, Black people start puberty a year earlier than Europeans, and Europeans start puberty about a year earlier than East Asians, also than like full-blooded Amerindians. So basically, according to this sort of spectrum, it's like actually like Amerindians are like more quote unquote K-selected on the spectrum than Europeans are. So that's actually something that I found sort of interesting, is people look at the RK thing and say, oh, they're going to say that the Europeans are extremely K. Well, not quite. I mean they're like, if you use this framework, Europeans are actually more on the R scale than most people, I believe, than Indians, for example, or Chinese. Now the problem is rates of reproduction are massively influenced by economic factors. Okay, but like when you look in the United States, you know, the Hispanic birth rate is collapsing. Okay, and I think that, well, I don't want to get into that. In fact, I think the white birth rate is actually specifically artificially depressed by a lot of beliefs people have, like what we call liberalism. And when you look at the fertility rates of conservative whites, I think that's actually more of like a quote unquote natural, but that's all really speculative, and that's why I don't really like to get into RK stuff, because you say things that are not that are not really solid, that are just sort of theorizing. So I don't want to really get into that. But yeah, so that was the first thing. Anyway, Kraut's argument. God damn it. So okay, yeah, and anyway, Kraut was arguing against the RK thing, saying that the alt-right is saying that. Well, it's weird. Like, he didn't really come out and. It's so weird. Like, was he saying that Millennial Woes thinks that he lays eggs, and then?
Yeah, that's basically what he said. Well, basically, what
kind of
the argument that Kraut has made is that that the people like Molyneux and Millennial Woes used RK in a misleading way, I would say, and he argues that because Molyneux, at least I've only seen his video on RK, but he argues that basically our theory refers to these people with these political views, and K theory refers to those people with political views. And Kraut basically said, no, all humans are K-types, and here's why. And then he basically said that that the only way humans could be R is if they had reproductive cycles like fish laying eggs in the hundreds.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, I mean, that's obviously so. But yeah, sure, humans are all K-type compared to, I mean, humans are K-type compared to like dogs even. And like, yeah, so whatever. It's obviously, he's obviously like conflating, like, do I have to say it? Humans, humans are K-type compared to like virtually all other animals.
Yeah, we don't lay eggs.
But like we're talking about variation within species, not between. So like it's RK continuum, within the context of what's normal for humans, not fucking. So it's really, yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, whatever.
The thing is that Kraut just relies a lot on semantics in his videos, and that's how he kind of confuses the conversation.
You know what? He is a native German speaker, and a lot of people forget that and I think there's a problem. Like, there could be like a language barrier, but a lot of people won't give him that sort of benefit of the doubt for a language barrier because of his fake accent. Like if he just kept his German accent while he spoke English, he would probably get a lot more charity for people thinking that he may not understand what a term means. But by creating this really, high scale, almost fictional English accent, what it does is it makes people assume that he knows what all the English words mean, when he may not. And so like for example, if someone with a thick German accent were making sort of what I think are the semantic errors that he's making, they might go, oh, he just doesn't understand what that means. Let me try to explain what it means to him. But with Kraut, it's like this highborn English accent. It never dawns on them that he might not know what certain English words mean. But remember, he's not a native English speaker, so even though he has the most English accent you could possibly have.
Yeah, he's really try-hard aristocratic accent.
So,
but yeah, as someone who I'm not a native English speaker, as you can hear from my accent, I have a Dutch accent. But so as someone with a Dutch accent, I would say that's kind of a cop-out, because I don't really have that problem with language barriers myself. And I know that Kraut is he does speak English really well, so I'm not sure how much of a language barrier that really is. I think it's more that his research has just been very flawed.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, for every one of these things, like, if there is a language barrier, if he is misunderstanding things, like even if that is the case, it doesn't even, like, the blame's still on him, because he refused to talk to the race realists, right? He refused to talk to the people who were like ready to come in and talk to him about all this stuff. Not just me, but there sure would have been plenty of other people. Kraut could have said, alternative hypothesis. Who the hell is that? I'm going to talk to the real names. I'm going to talk to, Jared Taylor or something. Jared Taylor would probably talk to him, and that would be, that would be fine. Jared Taylor would do a fine job, making all sorts of arguments, and so all these mistakes, like even if they are attributable to like him not understanding terms, like, well, why would he not try to get this cleared out, by the people he's arguing against, especially when they're willing to talk to you. It seems it's just so, weird. I keep using the term weird, but that's just like when you're gonna make a series like debunking people, and the people who you're going to debunk are like, okay, well, we're so confident in what we say, we'll lay it all out for you. We'll be sort of on call for you. You can message us whenever you want, and we'll respond to you in a timely manner on any of these points that you're looking into. I mean, it's like, but to deny yourself that opportunity, is, I would never deny myself that opportunity. Like if somebody I was making a response to said, hey, I hear you're making a response to a thing that I did, do you want to talk to me about stuff? I would be like, absolutely, because then I could like float responses. I could float arguments sort of in private, right? And get things clear and get a whole bunch of stuff cleared out. You would say, oh no, actually, I have a really good counter to your criticism here, right? And then by the time I finally went public, I would be public with the things that I thought were the truly intractable disagreements that I thought, quite clearly I'm right on, he's wrong on, or who knows, maybe on the topic, whatever it is I'm arguing against, I get persuaded,
Yeah.
So.
I mean, if he just stuck with kind of wanting to understand the arguments for human biodiversity and just really get into it, look at both sides of the arguments, then he could have made a good video, or at least if he just did a live stream with someone like Jared Taylor, that would have been so much better. But he has such a bitter personal grudge against the alt-right that it's just working against him, really.
Yeah, and just making up like a fake argument about the correlation between, heterozygosity and number of recognized subspecies. It's like, why would you say that? Or but another little thing, like I noticed this because way back in the day, there was a YouTube user who made videos attacking me. And in my response to him, I made a little chart of something. I forget what the chart was even about. I think it was like IQ and income or something. But it doesn't really matter. But this guy said, "Thanks for using my chart again." In his response to me, and he just said, "Yeah, thanks for using my chart again." It's like, but I literally made the chart. I made the chart in a program called Paint. And so now that's not like a huge thing to lie about. It's not like a really big deal. It's not like, but it's just like, why? It's just such like, why would you why would you lie about something so minor? And I saw, and the same thing sort of happened in Kraut's video where he said, this is the only link in the article that works. Like, no, like you can click on it, yeah, there was a dead link, but
I found it interesting that he didn't even bother to put the link that he tried to debunk in the description of his video.
Yeah. But that was just what was so weird about his response is that he had that like little weird lie that this is the only link that works in the article. I don't, what? Like, no, you can click on, like anybody could do that. Anybody could click on other links, see the other links work. He found one dead link, good for him. Yeah, but like why would you, like who does that? Who goes up to like, yeah, Michelle Catlin has, in none of his videos does he address race realism. Like, why would you, like, what? Why would you say that? It's just such a weird, bald, silly lie. It's not even like I don't even know, like, what does he even gain by that? He gains a little bit. I guess he gains a little bit of this little, credibility jab or whatever, but it's so minor and so, I don't know.
Yeah, it's so now we're kind of getting into the second video, and one of the things about that video was what I found interesting is that he kind of let the neurologist that he gets his sources from, their doctor or something.
Yeah.
He let him speak. I actually invited him to the stream, but he was too busy, which is a shame. But
Yeah.
he went to uh, essentially talk on behalf of him. And what I found interesting is that he began talking about sickle cell anemia and kind of
Yeah.
the medical differences
that's reading
the
the phone
medical
book.
the medical differences in race. But what I found interesting is, didn't he basically just gave an example of race differences?
Yeah, look, when these people say race doesn't exist, they're not okay. I think, I don't know if this is like I don't think it's a conspiracy, but as it works out. Again, I'm not saying their doctor guy, whatever, is doing this intentionally, but as it works out, what happens is you say, is they'll say, oh, biological race doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the public has a perception of what that means. Okay. Which is sort of, there's a colloquial perception of what that means. Oh, they're saying that there's, like, aside from the superficial differences, there's really almost nothing underneath that's different. That's what the public believes when they hear that. Now, it's actually a lot more complicated. What people who say race doesn't exist, what they actually mean by that. They mean something. They'll raise the bar and say, oh, to be a subspecies, you have to have an ethnicity distance of 0.15. Humans don't have that distance. Right, so they'll raise the bar or something and say humans don't meet XYZ classification criteria for subspecies. Therefore, subspecies, and they'll say subspecies is a synonym for race. That's often said, and therefore humans there are no races. So, but of course that's very different from like what the public is going to think when they hear scientists say race doesn't exist. Okay, they're not thinking like, oh, it doesn't meet this little category criteria here. They're thinking, oh, no. Okay, so he's saying race doesn't exist. Therefore, there are no systematic differences between, whites and blacks in any cognitive trait, any susceptibility to diseases or anything, right? Like when they say race doesn't exist, the public takes that a lot more, I guess, literally, for lack of a better term, than what race denying, quote unquote, race denying scientists mean when they say that. And it works out as a sleight of hand. I don't know if they're doing it on purpose. I don't know how many are doing it on purpose. If they know that the public interprets what they say much more literally or extremely, but that's sort of how it plays out. And so you end up, the public imagining. You end up with a lot of people like normie liberals, having much more crazy extreme race equalist views than even the scientists have, because they've been listening to the scientists and taking what the scientists say much more literally than what sort of the race denying scientists themselves actually even meant. So
I'm not maybe it's just like scientists are really scientists have a big problem with kind of getting across their points to people. Scientists generally aren't good speakers, so they tend to use terms that have a completely different meaning within the science community than what the layman would think. And I think
so. What I'm saying is that this goes back to Mr. The Doctor guy. The doctor guy, like, he's not lying. He's not being inconsistent when he points to like race differences, or he could point to 10 more, and it wouldn't necessarily invalidate what he means when he says race doesn't exist. Because let me put it this way: when he says race doesn't exist, he means something kind of stupid. Okay, he doesn't mean that. Okay, so that's the simplest way to put it.
I think what a lot of people, I think it's kind of a problem with taxonomy in general. It's that the classification of taxonomy tends to be very ambiguous and subjective, not
Yeah, and
just
people
with
don't.
race, but with species in general. But that doesn't mean that we need to just because species has a very ambiguous definition within taxonomy doesn't mean that species is suddenly a social construct.
Right, and well, that's a sign of somebody who I think is like doesn't have. That's a sign of somebody who's like, you know, Neil Tyson, fuck yeah, science. Is that when they
Yeah,
have like when they go, well, these are solid scientific categories, and it's what I call like Star Trek science. People
yeah.
have a much
The science is
yeah,
absolute truth.
or the science is absolute truth, or imagining that things are much are that the evidence for things is much more solid than it really is. I think that's
Yeah,
sort of the problem, because there was an interesting study I found where basically researchers were talking about were researching the effect of being presented research on global warming and on evolution. Um, it, I this may be something to make a video about, so I could go find the sources and do this. But anyway, the researchers, they presented liberals and conservatives in the U.S. parlance. You know what that means. So
mhm.
liberals and conservatives in the U.S. terminology, and they presented them evidence for evolution, and they presented them evidence for global warming. Now, um, the conservatives, when they were presented evidence for evolution and evidence for global warming, um, the conservatives didn't really change their mind, or they may have like had a reaction effect where they were even more certain it was wrong, or I don't know. What happened to the conservatives isn't really interesting. But what is interesting is that when the liberals were presented arguments for global warming and arguments for evolution, once they heard those arguments, they continued to believe the thing. They continued to believe evolution or global warming, but their confidence was reduced. And I saw that, and I think I like that, because that confirmed a little theory that I had, which was that a lot of these people don't understand the nature of the actual evidence of these things, and when the actual evidence is presented to them, it's a lot less than whatever they had in their head, if they even had anything specific in their head. If they just sort of think, oh, I've seen Star Trek, I know what science is like, that sort of thing.
Yeah. That's kind of a typical confirmation bias study that you seem to talk about, and I think I think the biggest problem with liberals, especially in the U.S., is that during the early
Well,
2010s, a bit late 2000s, you kind of had this new atheist movement with kind of people like Dawkins and Sam Harris, and they kind of fed this kind of cult of science that has kind of made these people believe that they are more intelligent in these issues than they really are.
yeah, well, that's a term. The problem is that's actually a kind of a nice description of it. We say cult of science. The problem is when you say cult of science, people will just go, "Oh, that's just a slur. That's
Yeah, you
just
just
and
hate
that
science.
that's just like because people call things they don't like cults all the time.
Yeah,
Like,
true.
oh, you're a libertarian. That is you're just in the libertarian cult. Okay. Oh, you're in the SJW cult. SJW is a cult, right? So the slur cult is not. It's used too much. So basically, it's lost its impact. But I think that's actually it actually makes sense when we're talking about like science, because I mean, Kraut is like the most recent and really salient example here, but like that's one thing I pointed out in his video. He said something that like the science of biology has no wiggle room for statistical error. Yeah, these are all clear-cut definitions with black
Yeah,
and white yes and no criteria, and that is like that's cult of science. And and so one thing I would say to a lot of people is like, well, if you want certainty, go find a religion. Okay. But the thing is, and that's sort of what happens with a lot of these people is they try to find certainty in science, right? Well, when you're trying to find certainty, that's like people who are interested in certainty, that's religion. Okay, and if you're trying to find certainty in science, well, what you're doing is you're making science out into a religion, and the result is going to be not real science as traditionally practiced, but something culty in the garb of quote unquote science. Right? That's what you're going to get.
Yeah.
But you say that that's a problem with liberals. Okay, that is a problem with liberals. I think the main problem with liberals is that they're not going to exist for much longer. Just because they're not having kids and they're outbreeding. So basically, like liberals are not going to be a thing in the U.S. I think in like 50 years. Now the Democrat Party is not going away. It's going to be a pure racial nationalist party. Like basically the quote unquote left as is traditionally known. Like this is my prediction going way in the future is that the left as is traditionally known is not going to exist in the U.S. Or at least it's going to collapse massively, and it's going to be replaced by racial politics, by blocks of blacks and Hispanics, and to a lesser extent Asian immigrants against white conservatives, and that's what it's going to be about in the future. So that's the next thing. So when we talk a lot about like these, we spend a lot of time dealing with like white liberal arguments. The reality is that the white liberals are going to disappear. They're going to die off long before long before you convince them of anything. So it's sort of that's what I think about white liberals. So and why I'm kind of don't really care so much about white liberals anymore. Because they're like, they're soon to be an unimportant demographic. So
that's quite an interesting take because a lot of people have kind of a you can say black-pilled view on demographics. They think it's usually the kind of right-wing white conservatives that are kind of declining.
No.
So this is an interesting view.
Well, actually, everyone's declining because everyone has below replacement fertility, like including blacks. So basically, as if you were to close the border in the U.S. population would naturally decline over time. But so the U.S. population growth is driven by immigration. So, but Trump can shut that down, can stop that. Then the conservatives at least have a internal demographic advantage in the U.S. Like people get really black-pilled because what they do is they look at what is the fertility rate of whites. And when you look at that, you're going to be very black-pilled because that includes like liberals. But the thing is, like conservative whites are at like 1.9 something, and the liberals are at like 1.3 something. So it's and black. And I have a video on this called why the right wing should be confident about racial or confident about demographics or something. But yeah, people should not be so black-pilled about demographics. And so whenever I hear, like somebody like Michael Moore, like celebrating, the coming non-white majority, it's like, well, that's true, but guess what? Conservatism is growing. So if you want to slice it sort of white, non-white, sure, you can do that. But, these white liberals, they were never our allies anyway. So who cares?
Yeah. That's, I think there's definitely a lot of information regarding the whole white genocide thing with alt-right people.
Yeah, I don't like that term. I think that's a bad term.
Yeah, I think that's kind of blackpilling, and that's kind of, oh, look, we will be a minority soon. I think that kind of radicalizes people into these kind of extreme policies of racial identity politics. And I think it's like, I think if we want to really avoid these kind of terrible conflicts, we need to educate the alt-right on kind of like, hey, it's going to be okay. We are not going to we are not going to face a one-party dictatorship of the Democrats that just have 90% of blacks vote for them.
Yeah. Okay. There's a little bit of disagreement. Like what you call, like what I think I don't know what you're referring to when you say extreme policies.
Well, I'm more talking about kind of the. Well, this may be a bit controversial.
Because I may be one of those people. So.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. When I'm talking about extreme policies, I'm kind of like talking about using force to segregate all the races in specific regions, or talking about like a pan-European Roman revival of Richard Spencer, those policies.
Yeah. Well, I support breaking up the United States into separate countries, and one of the countries would be a white-only racial state. And people say that that's extreme, but that's basically that was basically the policy for all of Europe until, and you can't really put a date on when it changed, but until after World War II, it was basically white only. So,
it's not like that I am against the idea of having a white majority state. Like, I'm not against people even segregating. I strongly believe in freedom of association, but it's kind of like I'm more looking at how do we go about it if we because if we want to use forceful ways, then I can see that going in very extreme and violent ways that I prefer to avoid.
Yeah. Well, okay. I guess we would say, okay, let me just sort of give you Ryan Falk's. This is King Ryan. King Ryan is managing the partition of the United States. Tell me what you think about King Ryan's policies. You find areas, for example, the first thing you do is you figure out how many people are want to be in sort of the Republican states of America, the Democrat states of America, want to be in Aztlan, want to be in New Africa, how many Native Americans want separate Native American states. So basically you take stock of what people want, where people want to live. That's step one. And after you've taken stock of what people want to live in what countries, then you figure out where those people are, right? You sort of assign basically, okay, this is how much land area value we're going to assign to the Aztlan people. Not just like total square miles, because that's like, you could say, okay, here, you get this big area out in the middle of the Nevada desert. Like, no, it's got to be land quality. There's got to be some sort of metric for that. So you come up with some sort of algorithm for that. And then you say, okay, this is how much land value area the Republican states of America are going to get. Here's the land value area the Democrat states of America are going to get. So you've decided sort of the final values. Then what you do is you carve out an area that is as contiguous as possible that encapsulates, the people in the countries that they want to be in. Right? For example, for the white ethno state, you find areas that are already, 80 to 100% white, right? And then so that's the starting point of like New Europe. And then say you carved out an area in New York, probably out of, jutting out in the coast in south of Oregon, up into Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, maybe a little bit into Utah, maybe a little bit into Minnesota, Nebraska, Kansas. And that's probably where New Europe would be if it would be at all.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then but you take that area, now you're probably at about 85% white already. Okay. Then what you could do is you say, well, our national goal is 95% white. So how do you do that? Okay, and I think the way you do that is you pay people to leave, right? Over a period of time, you pay people to leave. Now you could do something that's more authoritarian. You'd say, well, you got to leave in 10 years, and so figure it out in 10 years. Now I understand, free association, that's force, that's gun in the face and stuff like that. But you only have to do it once, right? It's only done once, and then once it's done, it's done. and now you've got the 95% white country, and that's that. So now that may be sort of a naive, or maybe not naive, because I don't, I'm not naive enough to think it would go so cleanly, but that's more of an ideal idea of how it would go, I think. So, and I don't think that's really all that terrible, frankly.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I like to look at hypothetical situations, and I think your ideas would. It would need a lot of social engineering, but if people agree to it, then I don't think it's a bad idea, really. If it's, but I didn't really want to kind of shit on the idea of ethnic segregation. Really, what I'm really more worried about is that as people going back to the whole thing, the whole idea of being black pilled and that the white people, the white populations are going to die out. It's that kind of rhetoric that makes people. It makes people scared. It makes people angry. It makes people very bitter, and that's when arguments and discussions like this kind of devolve into violence and conflict.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm kind of afraid of if the people kind of keep this black pilled worldview.
Well, it's hard. Well, there's a few things. Like, I think one thing that a mistake a lot of people make, and this is something that I have made for a long time, and a mistake that I continue to make on occasion, I have to catch myself, is getting in long, woolly arguments with white liberals. That's like the stupidest thing you could do. Okay, because like, look, if a white liberal actually wants to learn the thing, if he actually wants to learn the thing, he'll go read the thing. He'll go to a site, like, for example, he'll go to the alternative hypothesis, for example, and read stuff and either be convinced or not convinced. But usually, if they're reading, like, let me put it this way: when people set out to read something to understand an idea, they usually end up getting convinced by that idea, even if they don't intend to be convinced by that idea. That's just sort of how it goes. And so when you're actually like arguing with like a white liberal, there's not a whole lot of point to do it unless there's like a big audience, right? Because ultimately, like, if they're gonna be persuaded or not, it's gonna be persuaded based on them going out and reading it themselves. They're not going to be persuaded by talking to you in the conversation with you. They're not going to be persuaded. So it's sort of a waste of time. And in fact, if you get in a big long argument with them, they're probably just going to harden, like, emotionally, and be like really resolved, because like it's now a matter of pride and stuff like that. So yeah, for example, like Kraut's not going to be convinced of anything at this point. His emotional state is so hardened that there's no way. So, but frankly, that's sort of why I don't mind kind of shitting on him a bit, because I know there's no way he's ever going to be convinced. So I'm free to just shit on him. So
yeah, it's at this point it's just kind of entertainment.
Yeah, and he's like driving a whole bunch of people to like how many people knew about RK stuff before Kraut made his video? A lot fewer, okay, but now, like, basically Kraut's like giving all these ideas a platform to people who've never heard of before. It's really amazing. He thinks he's attacking it, like he's fortifying the alt-right with his videos. It's just the craziest thing.
He is like we talked about this before the stream started. Like, a lot of Kraut defenders really think that all the negative comments and dislikes are just alt-right haters, but it's actually fans of Kraut that are just completely disappointed with the lack of quality and research in the videos.
Yeah, it's like we said. I forget if I said this on the stream or if this was before the pre-stream banter. I forget, but yeah, he would be better off if he just went to like rationalwiki.org and made like all the classic arguments. Now, and so he would make all the classic arguments. Here's how it would go if he did that. He'd make all the classic arguments. He'd get like 5,000 likes, 1,000 dislikes. I would make a response, with the classic rebuttals to the classic arguments, people would go, Kraut, why didn't you respond to the alt-hype? And Kraut would go, he's too small, and that would be it. Right? That's what would happen if he did the classics. He may lose a few subscribers for doing the classics, but I think he would. But I think he wouldn't lose. I mean, he wouldn't lose like fucking like 1,000. All right, he would lose maybe. He would probably like be net close to 0 on his subscriber count. He would lose a few, but there are people who would be subscribing to him. And then after this blew over, it would be ops normal. But so that's what would have happened if he had just done the classics. But instead, he's thinking for himself, and that leads to very funny places.
Yeah, it's a mess really with crowds.
Yeah.
But
okay. I guess one is okay. Sorry to interrupt. I guess one thing I wanted to say here is with the Dr. Tour thing. Like I made a video response to crowd, and like I made it like really fast, and unfortunately, Dr. Tour had some arguments. Like I can't address every single argument that like Kraut makes or Dr. Tour makes, because if you do, because it takes longer to address something they say than for them to say it.
Yeah.
So basically, like I need to decide what are like the big arguments and just address those, because there's like some stuff like that Dr. Tour said that I just ignored. For example, saying there's no universally accepted definition of race. Race is blurry. Race isn't purely biological. It has a social dimension. Where there's multiple uses of race that generates a confused picture of what race means. Like, and so, like for example, the multiple uses of race generates a confused picture. And I'm just thinking about Hitler's usage of race. Because I read Mein Kampf, and Hitler. I'm just to clarify, I'm not a fan of Hitler. I think Hitler was a very silly person and a very destructive person. But Hitler was not a white nationalist. Anyway, but Hitler would say, talk about I think he would talk about the Polish race, the French race, the Italian race, the English race. Okay, so he's calling these European ethnic groups races. Okay, but then later in the war, and he was reported to have said, that he sort of lamented the fact that he was waging a war alongside Japan for the destruction of the European empires, right, against Britain and France, because they were at war with Japan, and Japan was tearing up the British Empire down there. And he was lamenting the fact that he was enabling the destruction of the empires of the white races. So it's like, well, wait a minute. So Hitler over here. So even the guy who's using race in like French and Polish and Italian and English, and also, another thing, he had a conversation with the French prime minister before the war, and he said that we should avoid a war for the good of the white race, right? So even Hitler, who used terms like the Italian race, the Polish race, the French race, would also use the term the white race. So when people say, "Oh, we're all just so confused about what race," like, is anybody confused? Like, is anybody actually confused by that? I don't think anybody is confused. Like when someone refers to the Scottish race and then they refer to the white race, like nobody's actually confused. But what people who want to like sort of deny race and sort of believe in flat Earth human biology, or want some sort of flat Earth of human biology, they'll hook onto that and say, "Oh, that's a confusion. That's an inconsistency," when it's not. It's just them just being litigious pricks. So, but anyway, but there's like a whole bunch of stuff. There's like a whole bunch of stuff that Dr. But the thing is, the stuff Doctor was saying, it was all classics. Like none of the stuff that Doctor was saying was stuff that he originated. So it's like you can respond to it, but it's like, I mean, if you read like the alt-hype reader or the race and IQ reader, it's all well worn. Like all the stuff Doctor was saying, it's all like well worn stuff that has set responses to set arguments. There's nothing new under the sun there. So
yeah, to kind of go back on the whole race thing, it kind of again goes back to the problem with taxonomy in general. Back when the whole evolution versus creationism thing was like pretty big, There were these
Oh, I
create
was I was I was like a creationist
really.
back in 2011. No, no, not really.
Oh,
But like they say, alt right. They are right wing SJWs.
yeah, yeah,
Um, well, back in 2011 when the creationists were the big boogeymen. Right now it's, well, I think actually we're sort of maybe entering the post anti SJW phase. But there was a period where SJWs were the big boogeyman and all the stuff was against SJWs. But back in 2011 it was creationists. Everything was against creationism.
yeah,
Creationism were the bad guys. And so it's funny. It's like the skeptics back when they were anti-creationist, the boogeyman was creationism. So I was like a creationist. Now I'm like an SJW because that's so.
yeah. That's the new boogeyman, so to
Yeah,
speak.
and so I'm like that. I am like an SJW now. So
Yeah,
that's kind of funny.
but
Uh,
to kind of get back on the whole creationist thing, a lot of creationists used arguments like find me a kind evolving into a non-kind. And what they would be doing is they would ignore taxonomy and kind of redefine, kind of use the ambiguity um, of taxonomy to shift their definitions into something that favors them more. So they tend to use kinds. And so that's how they could argue that, like, oh, a cat didn't evolve from a dog, so evolution doesn't exist. And that's kind of the same arguments I see now from kind of the race egalitarians. They make they make the classification of race, which is already very ambiguous, and they kind of twist it to fit a more social constructionist argument.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's yeah, that's one of the classic tactics, of course, to kind of promote science denial. And it's ironic because now they are being used by the skeptics, which used to hate the kind of arguments that the creationists make.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, most people they have will have like beliefs in sets. Yeah. Um, so, and that's something. Okay, I think like I don't want to get so much into that, but yeah, people will they take beliefs in sets. They don't take beliefs one at a time, and like the sets, like the thing is the sets of beliefs that are popular at places in time in history are, they come about not because they come about for like historical circumstantial reasons, right? So if you have like quote unquote, and that this is also goes back to why the term centrist is so retarded. Um, like for example, if you say, well, I'm a centrist, it's like, okay, so are you a centrist in 1930s Japan? Are you a centrist in what would be a centrist in the Soviet Union in 1950? Are you a centrist in Saudi Arabia today? Are you a so when they say they're a centrist, they're referring to a place in time in history. And so basically what they're saying is, aha, the common knowledge and the common shared norms and ideas of the place and time in history that I'm at, that's what I am. That's what centrism means, right? Because you're at the center of the beliefs of your place and time in history. So most people sort of take beliefs in sets. Now they can say they're quote unquote right wing. When they say right wing, that's right wing relative to, first off, however left and right is even defined, and then it's all just totally historically contextual, which is why. And so when you try to sort of point out, hey, these skeptics, they're being awfully inconsistent in their reasoning here. When they were talking about creationists, they lampooned them when they were using these kinds of arguments, but then they use the same kind of arguments when trying to deconstruct race. It's like, yeah, sure, there's obviously an inconsistency there, and there's a few people who you can point out that inconsistency to, and they'll be interested in it. But for most people, it doesn't work that way because they have beliefs in sets, and so they're not going to be really persuaded by you attacking any one idea in the set. Another thing people will do is, because like people don't have beliefs, they have systems of beliefs. So even if you attack one belief, what's going on in their mind may be, well, I don't know how to argue against what this guy's saying at this one point, but I know there's all these other things that are true that are based off of this point that he's saying is false. So this can't be wrong. Basically, it's like, all these nodes with wires sticking out of each other, reinforcing each other. And so if you knock out one node, the other nodes will just sort of, continue to reinforce that point, because, they'll, like, my whole system of beliefs can't be wrong, right? So if you knock out one point, you can't. It's a very difficult thing, and it doesn't quite. And so when you try to analyze it, like, well, these are like logically inconsistent things. It doesn't work that way. Like that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. So, I guess I'm sort of agreeing with you, but it's like, yeah, but that's just the nature of belief. So.
Yeah. It's kind of the warriors, how you refer to it. It kind of refers to what people, well, I want to use the term meme, but the term meme has become such a fucking stupid word. But when I talk meme, I use it in the original definition of how Richard Dawkins used it, in terms of kind of a cultural gene that basically adapts to different selective pressures in culture. And I think it's of course these points are inconsistent, but that's how they adapt basically. And we kind of have to look at how do we tackle that? How do we tackle such a complex, basically such a complex memeplex that
memeplex. I like it.
Yeah, a memeplex that constantly adapts to culture and whatever arguments you want to make.
Yeah. Well, that's the $1 million question, and I'll tell you one thing. If sort of hypothetically, if I did, like, looked at research on that stuff, I certainly wouldn't be just sort of sharing it. So yeah, I'll just say that. But yeah. So what were we talking about? I've sort of lost track of how this conversation even went.
Yeah, we've kind of went off the rails.
Yeah, and I think I'm sort of responsible for that. Sorry.
That's okay. It keeps the conversation going. So.
Yeah, Nicholas, look at this. What has happened so far? Yeah, good question. You're talking to the wrong people.
Well, I guess we can kind of go back to Kraut's video.
Yeah, I think that's sort of a dead horse. Although it's a dead horse, but it's going to keep. But he says he's going to make 2 more videos, so it's like I don't know. It's like
what can he do at this point? Like
I don't know. It's so weird. It's like round 1, round 2, and it's like all right. So here comes it's like I'm starting to, like, on the one hand, it's like I feel sorry for the guy. It's like, am I going to do this again? Like I don't know. It's like how much.
Basically,
like, is he gonna go down to 128,000 subscribers, 127? It's like, and he's just like promoting my channel like fantastically, like because Kraut made these videos, like a ton of people are like coming to my channel. It's just like really, like, thanks Kraut, you've done a lot to help. Here.
I kind of expected to actually have a discussion on IQ and race, but at this point it's just basically entertainment. It's kind of like how skeptics always used to react to the stupidity of SJWs.
Now that may happen. You know what? Kraut doing his videos like so bad that may cause some people to come in and say, you know what? Kraut's made really bad arguments. Why not have the real arguments about race and IQ and stuff? And then they'll come on and they'll do the classics, and then I can come in and respond to the classics. And by the classics, I mean things like all the race denial arguments, continuum fallacy, variation within between, poverty. It's amazing how many people still say poverty. It's like the most debunked. Like not even researchers who are not even like egalitarian, not even like Nisbet like pushes poverty anymore. Like nobody does. But they'll say poverty. They'll say like nutrition. They'll say like stereotype threat. Like if they're more exotic, they'll say like stereotype threat, and so
Yeah, and
that's the more advanced version. Is stereotype.
like a lot of arguments based on the assumption that we think it's all 100% genetic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They'll argue. Yeah, they'll say, look, here's here's somebody training for an IQ test, and his IQ went up. Like, clearly,
Yeah.
like just
Yeah, like oh look, nutrition boosts IQ, so it's all social construct. It's not 100% genetic.
right. And I just sort of imagine like if they made that argument, like I don't know, back in the day, I did the sports, I did sports games, and I'm just thinking like, what if somebody did that? Say, look, how strong you are has nothing to do with genetics because look at how much stronger you can get by lifting weights.
Yeah, basically.
It's sort of the. Now I made that sort of I remember back in the day, like I made that argument, and to say it's like just how silly that is, just how silly, because it's the same form of argument saying you can do things to raise IQ, therefore no genetic component to IQ. You can do things to raise strength, therefore no genetic component to strength. It's the same sort of fallacious reasoning, the same form, but like I remember Evogen made a response to me saying, Ryan Falk is equating physical strength to mental intelligence. Like he thinks they're the same thing, and tried to argue against the analogy. But yeah. But funnily enough, is something that a lot of people today I don't think appreciate. A lot of you young whippersnappers here don't quite appreciate is that the Overton window has moved massively. I don't know if you want to say to the right because it's moved against libertarianism, but it's moved massively in favor, like massively in favor of like being able to talk about race realism and being able to talk about white racial interests than it was in the past. And so it's a totally different environment. Even like, and another thing I'll say is that there's far less censorship today than there was back in the period between 2007 and 2011. Like, because people will today talk about like getting videos limited stated, having their search stuff suppressed or whatever. But back in the day, like YouTube didn't do any of that. They just took out your channel. I think it's funny because like Tucker Carlson went on Fox and he was attacking the Southern Poverty Law Center for a lot of their financial shenanigans and not actually dealing with what they claim to be dealing with. I made a video back in the day saying basically the exact same arguments against the SPLC that Tucker Carlson made, banned, like from YouTube. And so that's just how much things have shifted. I don't think a lot of people realize that. And so people are, and I also think it's sort of funny, like these political like YouTubers, complain about, my videos got demonetized, and I'm just like, dude, my account was like demonetized, fucking, fucking like almost the day after it was made, like seriously. So that was that's a funny thing to look at people today, what they're talking about. So thinking, I got censored. I got one video basically taken down. Like limited stated, yeah, it's basically the video got taken down. And it's like, well, like, okay, but count your lucky stars, buddy. Like, but yeah. I mean, none of it's good, but it's like, it's just a little perspective here. It's like, it's far more open than it was in the past. And both YouTube censors less than it did in the past, and the public is far more open-minded than it was in the past. It was rough back in the day.
Yeah, I'm not that quite familiar with how censorship worked with YouTube in the past and that kind of stuff, but I do see a lot of there are some things that do worry me, like the whole problem with the Daily Stormer and how they got their websites down. So there's still a lot of problems and censorship.
I'm just talking about YouTube. I'm not talking about the wider internet.
Okay.
The wider internet may actually be getting worse.
Yeah, but I am also pretty positive about the Overton window regarding these issues. I mean, it's still way far of being mainstream acceptance, but what I am seeing is a shift where it's acceptable to at least criticize multiculturalism and social constructionism, which I'm pretty glad about.
Things have moved in a good direction. Another thing is that for the United States, now things may actually be pretty dire in Europe, but in the United States at least, the previous generation, there was a poll of high schoolers. I would recommend a blog called The Audacious Epigon that goes into this stuff, and he's talking about, and he looks at he found okay, I'll talk about the first one. He found a poll of high schoolers who were in high school during the 2016 presidential election, and he found that just straight up, Hillary versus Trump, it was okay. I'm just saying the numbers from memory. I guess I'll put a link in in the description, or you can just look up Audacious Epigon.blogspot. And basically saying that Generation Z is like going to appears to be very conservative, or at least very Trumpist, at least very pro-Trump. Because among Generation Z, among the high schools that were polled, Trump won like 60-something to 30-something. Now that it may not translate that well into adulthood, but it's overwhelming. And there was another poll that looked at incoming college freshmen, who they would vote for in the presidential election. But the thing is, in that poll, they broke down literally all the possible candidates, including the primary candidates. So they had you could pick Bernie Sanders, you could pick Ted Cruz, you could pick Ben Carson. And in that, the Republicans lost, but it was only like 47-48, if I recall correctly. And the winner, the most voted for candidate was Sanders, and number 2 was Trump. But Republicans were like neck and neck among college freshmen, and people generally, become more. They tend to vote more for the Republican Party as they get older. And so if it's only 47-48 in college freshmen in that poll, then the future is looking pretty okay, at least for the Republican Party. Now, question: what's the Republican Party going to do? That's another whole ball of wax. But yeah. So I see people who are so massively depressed, and it's funny. A lot of their massive depression comes from them having been sort of gaslit by legacy media. And I guess I'll sort of say this. I was sort of gaslit by. I sort of got conned or duped into thinking that Charlottesville was a bigger disaster than it actually was. I think it was still a negative thing. It wasn't good, but I thought it was like going to be catastrophic, but it ended up not being that bad. I don't think there's polling data out of that that said that it wasn't quite that bad. So anyway, yeah, things are moving in a pretty good direction. A lot better than I think a lot of black people think they're moving. So.
Yeah, and you talked a bit about Europe, and that kind of depends on where you live in Europe. But as for my country, I live in the Netherlands, and back in the 80s, I wasn't alive then, but I know a bit about Dutch history. And in the 80s, there was a political party called the Center Party, led by Jan Hanmaat, and he had pretty moderate views on immigration and multiculturalism, kind of what the skeptics now believe in terms of radical Islam and things like that. But he had a slogan that was like "Fool is fool," but those slogans and those views, those moderate views on maybe Islam is pretty dangerous and maybe it's hard to, maybe we should have more strict assimilation models. That was so extreme back then that the party never got anywhere. It was such a fringe party, and none of the other parties wanted to really to work with him. And now when you look at the Netherlands, now we have Geert Wilders. And that guy, his platform is like, we are going to tax hijabs, we are going to ban mosques, we are going to ban immigration from Muslim countries altogether. And he is now the second biggest party in the Netherlands. That is the country that's known for being like liberal and progressive. So
Yeah.
I think it's an international thing that things are really going to the right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know. I see. I'll believe when some policy starts happening in Western Europe. I sort of see Western Europe as kind of probably the least optimistic place that there can be. Maybe Canada as well would be worse. So, I have much more faith in Eastern Europe and Eastern Europe and the whites in the U.S.
I think what benefits the United States over Europe is that the United States has a very presidential system where basically you don't have to make a coalition. Either one party wins or the other party wins. And so when someone like Trump wins, he is the leader. He can enact like all these kind of laws, and he can, and it kind of depends on the politicians there. But if he has a majority, he can really change the country. And with many European countries, they have a parliament system. So when you, for example,
that seems to be broadly true what you're saying, but it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, I know it's complicated, but in general, like if Geert Wilders won in a U.S. system, then he was the president. Then he is the leader in that sense. But if he was the biggest party in our country, then he would still need to make a coalition with like at least 4 parties, and not a lot of people like Geert Wilders and want to work together with him. So even if I'm simplifying it a bit, the fact is that in terms of identity politics and kind of shifting things in favor of, I guess, really change, it's much easier in America than in a country where you need to make coalitions and build consensus, really.
Yeah. I would say that that I think the biggest advantage of the U.S. is that for example, something I said in another video is that the support for their state seceding in the U.S. is like close to as high as Trump's support was at his lowest point, which was in February of 2016. That was when Trump's like approval and support numbers were his lowest. And support for your state seceding, not just support for secession in principle, but wanting your state to secede, is about the same as Trump's support at his lowest point. I need to write down all the stuff that I'm referencing and what I need to link to. So the Pigany, the Epigon, demographics. All right. So what else did you want to talk about? You want to talk about how long has this gone on? It's gone on a while.
Yeah, it's 1 hour and almost 1 hour and 30 minutes. So.
So do you have anything else you want to talk about, or?
Well, we could go for a bit on the arguments against race realism in the Rational Wiki page that we were talking about. If you want to.
I don't think that would be fruitful. Like, I could, but this is something like the thing is all this is like you need studies, because they're citing studies and you need to go into the studies and you just kind of counter with the studies, and it's like, and that just takes time, and you can't really do it on the fly here. So
and we've already we've already gone very long, so
Yeah.
that would take a lot of time.
So yeah, I guess okay, we're talking about censorship. I guess sort of as a last thing, uh, just right before the stream, I watched a video you made that was against well, the thing is, you said you were against nationalizing social networks as a utility.
It's kind of a
Yeah.
semantic issue. I've had a lot of people say that wasn't really the policy of Steve Bannon, but
Yeah. Now I think there's an important distinction between nationalizing and regulating. Do you see what I'm?
yeah,
Because like nationalizing, I'm not saying that the government should take over, but that that basically, Google and Facebook and any major social network, um, it's inherently monopolistic because the value of a social network is people being there. And so as people are at your social network, the value of your social network increases. So it's difficult to go to get on Gab or get on BitChute or whatever because the people are at these other places. Okay, so it's an inherently monopolistic thing. Once you're the big dog, it's difficult to break that monopoly. Now, the big dog can just be so wildly incompetent because they've had no competition for so long. They've been able to get away with crap for so long. They can become so wildly incompetent and become sort of institutionally incompetent to where the people running the show, once their ship starts to sink, they don't know what to do because they've been top dog for so long and they've been able to get away with crap for so long that once they start sinking, they can't deal with anything. And so it's possible for these sort of network effect monopolies to eventually collapse. To eventually fail. Like MySpace, for example, failed. I think Yahoo may have been the top search. I don't know. But but the problem is, like, sure, MySpace got replaced by Facebook, but the problem is MySpace was a monopoly, okay? And MySpace censored speech. MySpace was like MySpace abused its monopoly power to censor speech. Then it got replaced by Facebook, and then Facebook used its monopoly power to censor speech. Okay, so the fact that sure the monopoly got replaced by another monopoly doesn't really matter in terms of what we're talking about, right? And also, I guess we would say these are not exactly like private entities. Like sort of the argument is like, well, it's their house or their company, and you don't have a right to go up to someone's house or go to someone's business and start saying your political views. That's not analogous at all, because these companies, what they're doing is they're aggressively and proactively monopolizing the space of discussion, specifically that, right? They're not like a bread factory or some sort of yogurt factory, and preventing some political activists from speaking in their factory, right? It's not like that at all. Like these people are going out and like, taking over the public space effectively and then shutting people out they don't like. So I think it's a totally different situation. And I think like in terms of regulation, like there's obviously danger, right? Government regulates what are they going to do? But I see that as like, I'll put it this way. I'll give two examples of government regulation in this. American Renaissance, they have their American Renaissance conference all the time. And in the past, they used to use private hotels. The problem with that is that people would call up the private hotels. You get all these, anti-racist organization calling the hotels, making threats, and the private hotel will cancel, okay? So they have started to use, I forget, government hotels, but basically American Renaissance uses government facilities, uses government sort of meeting facilities at this point. And they schedule the time for the government facility. And the government facility, I guess they get bomb threats, they get threats all they want. Doesn't matter because it's a government facility. And so American Renaissance is able to have their meetings at a place because it's run by the government in the US. Yeah, and I would also point out in Charlottesville, we can talk about how bad the mayor was and the governor and calling the state of emergency. But the courts allowed Richard Spencer and that Kessler guy, who I'm very skeptical of, allowed them to have their event. Now, sure, other elements of the government that were not the judiciary, they did sort of screw around with Richard Spencer. They did. It was a setup, okay, right? It was a setup done by the government. But if it was a private entity, if it was a private actor, they never would have allowed that sort of unite the right thing. And worst case scenario, let's say we do get government regulation of these social networks, basically saying that once your social network reaches a certain size, then your denial of access to that is basically in effect a breach of free speech, right? That you're basically blocking free speech. Now, the worst thing that I think could happen is basically the government allows Zuckerberg to censor all he wants. I think that's like the worst case scenario, because and of course the best case scenario is that the government says, hey, unless it's illegal, unless these people are calling for murder or calling for doing actual illegal stuff, you can't remove it from the site. So I think that would be, I think there's not much of a downside to it, and the upside is very good, because I don't see like an alternative. Now, unless there's like an alternative social network that's run by our guy, if that's the case, then obviously, yeah, we want the government to stay out, entirely, because like if we control the social networks, then the only thing government regulation could do is, fuck us over, right? So, but when the social network is run by, Zuckerberg, then regulation by the government could really only be good. That's sort of how I see it. So.
Yeah, so you're kind of arguing from a political strategy point of view, essentially. So you're basically saying that the government should regulate this as a public utility because it will be good for our group, basically, and bad for their groups. At least that's what I'm getting. It's kind of basically just a practical strategy of
but also I'm also like a fan of free speech in principle as well. But like let me put it this way: when I'm talking about the the United States is not a real country in my mind, so I'm basically not like principles. Like I view principles as being something that we start to do once we have real countries. Once you have a real country, but right now it's just nuts. It's just a madhouse, and our opponents don't have any principles, or at least they don't reciprocate our principles. So there's no point in living by principles if all they do is cripple you and they're not reciprocated. And if your principles aren't reciprocated, you're not really living by the principles anyway. Because let's say, oh, I support free speech, and my opponent does not support free speech. So then what happens? Let's say you have two YouTube channels, and one YouTube channel blocks opposing speech, whereas your channel allows free speech. It's like, well, would it be principled? Like, are you being principled there? Like, because what happens is basically those other people, they have access to their channels and the comment section of your channels, whereas all you have access to is your own channels. You see how this works, and see how that's sort of unfair, and you're not actually living by those principles, right? What you're actually living by is your opponent gets an advantage. That's what you're actually living by, right? You may be trying to live by the principles, but all you're really doing is giving your opponent an advantage. So that's why I don't really. So these principles are like we're in the nut house here. The principles are not relevant because they're not actionable. So.
Yeah, I can see what you mean, but I can also see the practical downsides of using these kind of tactics, because you've seen just to give a recent example, was a company that hired like a transgender model, and that's there was a black transgender model, and she basically went on a rant about how all white people are racist, and what led to that was that the company basically fired her because she was being racist,
Yeah.
essentially. And so people on the left were outraged because she got fired for giving her opinion, giving her free speech. But what they don't seem to realize is that they've been doing that to other people. And so what you've seen is they've created such I guess a a how do you say it? They've created such a culture of offense and people being fired over their views that themselves have become a victim of it, basically. And when I hear when I hear you talking about how you want how you want the other side censored because they use these type of tactics against you, then I feel like, let's say the government censors Facebook and no, not really censoring, but treats it as a public utility, basically. So they can't really, Facebook kind of becomes under the regulation of government. What prevents the government then from targeting these alternative sites as well? And that you basically become the victim of your own tactic.
Yeah, that's always a risk. If you erect a hammer that the hammer used against you. Yeah. I mean, like
So
I'm saying it's worth. I'm just saying it's worth the risk.
Okay,
right? Because yeah, they could. Now the federal government has actually been pretty good about that. And of course, and in the medium term, Trump is going to appoint more judges than any president has in a single term. I don't want to say in history, but in a long time. So the judiciary has actually been pretty good about this stuff, and Trump is sort of solidifying the judiciary. So I understand what you're saying. Yeah, the government could be used, to make the situation even worse. But I think if the government were to regulate and to sort of treat it as a utility, that they could target, but look, like they're already doing that. Like, for example, PayPal has already canceled American Renaissance's credit thing or whatever. Like, basically, American Renaissance can't work through PayPal anymore. Okay, so like they're already doing this, and I don't think that, like, when we're talking about regulation, like I don't think the like what you're talking about makes sense if we were proposing nationalization of Google or nationalization of Facebook, because then government could be running it, and government could decide the policy of what's allowed and what's not allowed. I'm talking about regulation, treating it like a utility, where the guys at Google are still ultimately in charge, but there's more rules about what they're allowed to do at Google, in terms of allowing speech on, and that's so I don't think with regulation, I don't like them to put it this way. I don't think the government would regulate Google to censor more than what Google does. I don't think the government would come in and say, "Hey, Zuckerberg, you're not censoring enough. You got to censor more." Right? I don't see that as a possibility. Now, if the government took over Facebook and was creating and was running it themselves, then I could see what you're saying to be more plausible. But if they're just regulating it, I don't see it as even being plausible that they would increase censorship through regulation. But on the other side, based on how the federal government has treated this stuff in the past, I think the federal government, the only real direction that regulation could go is to make these social networks less likely to censor speech. So.
Okay, yeah, I can. Basically, what you're saying is we've already hit a point where we just have to use these tactics.
Yeah, although, you know what? I don't know exactly if we've reached that point where we have to. Like, because as I said, YouTube censorships right now is not is not that crazy. But the thing is, we're sort of at their mercy, and like at any day they could just flip the switch. And, right? So obviously you don't want to you don't want them to get like really bad.
Yeah.
Like they were in the bad old days. So basically, I think at this point I'm I'm like pro regulation of the social networks at this point.
Fucking statist.
Yeah, within the context. Yeah.
Well, when you talked about how Google isn't really a private company and is really just being funded by subsidies and kind of being already kind of being semi-public utility in the first place, that's kind of led me thinking about what could be used as a compromise, because like Google wants those subsidies, they quite rely on it. So my proposal would be that that if these companies want to keep censoring and kind of doing what they want, then they basically should lose their subsidies. And if they want to keep those subsidies, then they need to follow these guidelines that the government sets on them. I think that's
how much subsidies do they get? I didn't know about that.
I don't know either, but I think usually these corporations lobby a lot for subsidies. So I think this would be a good compromise to not really give government a potential control over the company, but also create a kind of system where it will be against the interest of Google to continue their censorship.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how if whatever I'm sure Google gets some, like every company gets some subsidies, but I don't know how if Google gets enough subsidies for it to be enough to dissuade them. I don't know how much.
I would have to research that.
Yeah, and we're obviously not gonna research that here, and we're not gonna settle that issue. We're not gonna settle that issue here. So it's just sort of
true.
But
I think but
it's a good idea. It's an interesting idea.
And I think that's a pretty good place to kind of. I think that's a pretty good place to end right now.
Okay. All right.
At least, unless you still got an argument or something.
No. I think this was fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Talked about some stuff.
Yeah, I think it was a good argument.
Yeah, it's funny because like I do the long video Sunday, and it's like I don't know what to talk about, and then you contacted me on Twitter, said, "Hey, want to chat with me on my stream?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, good." So this has been good because it's given me. Maybe I should do that. Maybe long video Sunday should just be like a stream with somebody, because it's easier to talk to somebody than it is to say, "Hey, I'm Ryan Falk. Let me talk about things for an hour."
Yeah, it's much easier to talk with someone else because there's always kind of something that someone brings up.
Yeah. So okay, I guess we're done.
Yeah, I think it was a pretty good stream. So yes, any closing statements that you want to make?
No, not really.
Okay. Then we are going to end the stream right here.